Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Ellen Magali. I'm the executive editor at Veranda, and I want to thank ADAC for having us for another great opportunity to have one of these beautiful house discussions. I want to thank our panelists and all of you for joining us. We're going to be talking to Robert A.M. Stern Architects, and in particular, two of the authors of this book, which was out this year, Houses. And the weight, let me tell you, the weight and stature of this book is sort of, let's just say it like mirrors the gravity of their firm and their sort of stature in the design conversation today. It's a wonderful book and there's so many beautiful houses in it. And we're going to be looking at a lot of them. And, the topic, which is looking to the past for the architecture of the future. It's particularly resonant right now. I have a feeling that everyone today is sort of taking kind of like a 1 hour break from rebuilding, starting a new house, renovating, upgrading, downsizing. God bless you. You might be trying to snap up something in the market right now, which, more power to you. Everything is crazy right now. But what a fantastic time to talk about architecture and new ideas and big ideas. And so we have the right people for that. So we're talking about it every day at Veranda. We're talking about what the new American house looks like. We're talking about what is most important to the way we live right now. And so that's sort of, it kind of ripples through their book. And I think we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about those things. Before we really dig in and get into it, I wanna thank our sponsor, Logan Gardens. They are over at ADAC, and sit tight. We're going to have a quick word from them and we'll be right back. Outdoor living is hot right now, so make sure you go and visit them. Okay, one moment. Let's get our screen going here. Okay. Robert A.M. Stern Architects is one of the leading, most well-respected firms in the country, or it's a reputation that's 50 years in the making. And what's really impressive to me is their range of what they're known for, what they've been working on for so many years. You have these soaring urban towers and presidential libraries. And then you have these village libraries and these village town halls. Good design is good design, and they show that to us every day. We always need more of it, and they have so much to teach us. They designed the clubhouse at the Ocean Course at Kiowa, and so many prominent buildings all over the world. But I think, what we know them so well for, in our day-to-day is their approach to American houses. And, from the Northeast to Florida, this one in the Great Lakes, and out in Malibu even, that all embody so much of what we talk about so often in Veranda, which is a sense of place, the spirit of place, harmony with the environment. These are principles that they use in every single project they go into. And, many times there's a connection to the past. And we talk about context is everything. We talk about that so often in Veranda, and it's discussed in beautiful detail in the book. So here with us today are two of the book's authors and partners at the firm. I'm first going to welcome Roger Seifter, who has designed some of the firm's most well-known projects in locations as varied as New York, California, London. He's been published in every major media outlet, and he's a member of some organizations that are very close to our heart, the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art, Sir John Soane's Museum Foundation. These are classical organizations that really embrace a sense of precedent and classicism in new buildings we create. Roger, welcome.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine.
And thanks, by the way, to you and NADAC and Veranda and to Logan Gardens for providing this platform.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be able to speak with you. I'm gonna come right out of the gate here and just say, you know, you've been a partner at the firm for decades. Is there anything that you're seeing more of right now in the new projects that you're beginning?
Actually, what I've been seeing the most of are thank you notes from old clients who have been stuck at home for the last year and enjoying their houses sort of anew and seeing it from a different perspective. I mean, that's one thing. Another thing that we're seeing from old clients and also new clients is a new significance for their working places in the house, whether they're libraries or home offices or a corner of the kitchen or a separate building even on their property. It's a very, very important programmatic part that's always been there, but now it has a renewed importance.
Yeah, yeah. It's taking on probably a whole range of new uses and appreciation. Yes. Well, wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and welcome one of the other partners, Randy Carell, and the another co-author of the book, Randy Carell, who joined the firm in 1983 and has designed houses from East Hampton to Aspen, Martha's Vineyard to Chicago's North Shore, all the places we want to be. And he too has been featured in the major magazines. And he recently, I thought this was interesting, really recently contributed a design for Hudson Valley's Olana exhibition, Follies, Function, and Form, Imagining Olana's Summer House, which sounds really exciting. Welcome, Randy.
Hi, good morning, Ellen. Great to be with you, and I look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. I'm going to send the same question over to you. Is there a prominent trend or anything that you're seeing more of now with the projects or with your clients?
Yeah, you know, I'm seeing the rise of the lake house. I think we're over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had many people come to us, and instead of having a house on the ocean, have a property on a lake. I think it's, you know, as the coastlines get more populous and more threatened by global warming, people are looking to other locations, whether it's the Great Lakes or the Finger Lakes. They see it as an attractive alternative to being on the ocean.
Oh, I can see that, and it's not something that you know, we talk a lot in Veranda about, you know, where are people going now, and we're seeing them, you know, really climate has a lot to do with it now, especially when you can't get around that much. You know, you need to be able to get to the outdoors, and that makes a lot of sense. I can't wait to see some of these lake houses, by the way, Randy. Just
well, there's one in the book and more underway. So.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to get to questions about some of these houses that are in the book, but before we do, I want to invite everybody in the audience to submit questions as through the Zoom. There's a Q&A function in Zoom, and we'd love to get to them at the end of the program. This is a pretty great opportunity to be able to speak directly to Roger and Randy, and so as they come up, just send them in and we'll get to as much as we can at the end. So, okay, so let's get to, we're starting with, the first thing we're gonna talk about is historic precedent. But as I was paging through this book, first of all, it was very hard to cull down what we would talk about, but as Steele reminded me the other day we were having a work session, and it was a good reminder for all of us. We were like, okay, we're editors. We need to be able to cull down things. That's sort of our job. It's in there. So anyway, it was very tough to cull down these projects to exactly what we were going to discuss. But I came across this house on the Northeast coast, and nothing in the world would have stopped me from talking about it. And Roger, when I first asked you about it, I think I was still kind of drunk off of it, you know, and I asked you if you would, you know, I said, would you say it's a rambler, you know? And you said, no, we have a different word for it. What did you say?
It's a ground scraper.
Um,
I'd like to say that I coined that term, but it actually came to us when it was in for architectural review with the local zoning officials. One of them, I guess he coined the term on the spot, but it seems particularly apt.
Amazing. I mean, I feel like that's ripe to be copied, you know. But it, you know, as I was reading about it, it was this. It's actually the challenges of site and zoning can sometimes lead to our most original designs. Can you tell us a little bit about the parameters of this project?
Sure.
Or more or less baked in when you got to the site?
Sure. Well, we had constraints on all sides when we started this design, as well as up and down. There were local zoning setback and federal setbacks from the water line, from the sides and from the front of the property, that led us to design a long and narrow building, which fit its envelope, and that was parallel to the ocean. At the same time, there were federal flood guidelines. This is right after Superstorm Sandy. So they combined to give us an allowed elevation above grade, as well as a maximum height. So there was a fairly narrow sandwich, vertical sandwich that we could build within. And the third constraint generally was this dune in front of us, between us and the ocean, which would effectively block the view of the ocean from the ground floor. So that led us to design what we call an upside down house, with the primary rooms on the second floor, which means you have to figure out how to get up there, and secondary bedrooms and spaces on the lower level. So we designed this long, low ground scraper, so to speak, more or less parallel to the ocean, with most of the rooms facing the ocean and the principal rooms on the second floor, which also allowed us to take advantage of the space inside the roof and give them higher and more interesting ceilings.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to show the audience more of this house in a moment. But, you know, as you were sort of trying to work through these challenges, and you looked to a historic houses, as you often do, and so I'm going to show this one. This is one that this is the Lyman C. Joseph's house, and you look to this. What lessons here did you borrow or adapt, or what drew you to this one?
This is a house. It's the Lyman C. Joseph's house by Clarence Luce in Newport, I believe, Rhode Island. And since I was in college, I've admired this house. It's like ours. It's a long and low house with a stone base, and most of its second floor subsumed within this gambrel roof, which lends an overall organization to the house and allows the rooms on the second floor to express themselves almost picturesquely, with these dormers that are spread willy-nilly along its length.
Mm-hmm.
So we used a lot of those cues in designing our house.
And I think what we're gonna show, we're gonna take a minute to show how this translates on the interior, which is just gorgeous. You'll have to pick up the book to see all the photos of it, but I included a few here. This is the rear elevation, is that correct?
That's the oceanside elevation. So all those spaces on the second floor, and that's the living room, dining room in the middle, the primary suite over to the left, and the family end of the house, kitchen family room on the right. And they all have completely clear views of the ocean across the dune.
Wow. Okay. And I just love the use of stone here. I just think it is just beautiful. And now this question goes to both of you. You know, it clearly, I'm going to cycle through some of these photos again. This clearly has its own identity. You know, when you're looking to historic homes for inspiration, what are the critical ways that you can sort of, you know, ensure it has its own design and it's rooted in the right era?
I'll go first. I think it's critical that you keep yourself inspired and not copy. That when we look at precedents, we look at them closely so that we can understand their underlying principles and apply those to our design, rather than simply lifting the look of something and transporting it to today. And by doing that, we can incorporate, today's technologies and today's functional needs more easily and seamlessly into that new design and make it as relevant today and as applicable, equally applicable or evocative of what's gone on before.
Yeah.
I would add, that these older shingled houses that we love, the exteriors have kind of stood the time, taste and time better than the interiors, which are often darker palettes and natural stained wood, and a kind of what most people would find gloomy today. And certainly, our clients want something bright and fresh on the insides of their houses.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And speaking of these, this isn't going to look like I'm going to the, speaking of those sort of shingled exteriors that have stood the test of time, we're going to move on to East Hampton. And this house, we're starting with a before photo. And this is a project of Randy's. This is a 1920s colonial. And I feel like the audience can play along here because as I asked Randy this question, which is, you walked onto this project and what did you identify right from the outset as opportunities of things that needed to happen to kind of like, because this was, I should clarify, owners were looking to renovate this house and had hired you to do this, and you walked up and saw some opportunities here. What did you see?
Well, the first opportunity I thought was to tear it down, but our client feel that way. This house is on, in my view, one of the most beautiful streets in the Hamptons, and with some of the most beautiful houses in the Hamptons. But this house was kind of an anomaly. It has this Leave It to Beaver, clapboard colonial look, but the simplicity of it appealed to our clients, and they saw somewhere buried in it a kind of a farmhouse, and asked us to make it more of a farmhouse. And so I took the challenge, and this house to me, and I don't think we have before slides of the interior, but it just felt very claustrophobic and enclosed, and no relation to its very beautiful landscape and surroundings.
Yeah, and claustrophobia is just not a word that we think of that comes to mind when we see the after, which is what I'm showing here. And I have a few more photos to cycle through that we'll pause, but yeah, I feel like this is just this like story. This sort of the power of porches, because as we go through this, as you can see, you just sort of built it out into its environment. And I wanted to point out too, you did draw, you kind of looked at it and you said, okay, you took some inspiration also from some historic houses in the neighborhood, right? Something right down the street.
Yeah, well, this house is kind of the story of the porch. Our clients love porches, and there were a couple existing on the house that we enlarged so they were more usable. But then across the front of the house, we added a porch with kind of two pavilions, one at each end, that are deeper and larger and can be furnished. But that front porch was actually inspired by a McKim and White house that had a similar configuration on the front.
Didn't you say that this reminded me of it, you mentioned that the clients really love porches. Didn't they say something like, oh, we'd love like a front porch, and or they envisioned, or you envisioned, like they envisioned something really small, like a little,
Yeah, well, you see at the center of this, the little pedimented porch at the entry, that was more or less an existing porch. I mean, it was rebuilt, but that's how the front porch was. So we just extended that porch across the front, and then bracketed it with those pedimented porches to each end, and took something quite simple and made it kind of a lot grander, and really the keynote for this house, I would say.
Yeah, it has such a strong relationship with its environment. And again, I'm just going to kind of cycle through some pictures. But another thing is that you said almost every space opens to an outdoor living space. It can kind of
Yeah, which was not the case in the existing house. There was like no way to get out of the house. This is the living room you have on the screen now, and then this is a porch off the family room. So really the important thing in design was to make every room accessible to the gardens, both visually and physically. Yeah.
And so how can we take this idea and apply it to homes? Because obviously there's a lot of porch here. And, what would you say the lessons are in making sure, in saying how and when is this like growing outside idea most successful and most natural? Or what's the best way to do that?
Well, I think, many houses, you see new houses, the porches are vestigial. And this is really about making porches usable of the proper dimensions that you can furnish them and really enjoy them as an outdoor room.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing to do, which Randy has done seamlessly here, is not to let the tail wag the dog, and is to respect the scale of what you're starting with your addition, so that they don't overpower it.
Right. Because there was nothing overpowering about this one, and I thought, but how does that work? Obviously it's what you do well, but that I did notice a great deal of balance in this house, which is. But now, Randy, you didn't tear anything, like you used the existing footprint.
We did, but we didn't intend to rebuild most of the house, but that's how it ended up.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
The ceilings and the first floor were 8 feet high, and I had devised this scheme where we could kind of cut the house off at the knees and raise the second floor and the roof and on. Which all sounded very ingenious. But then when the builders looked over the plans, they said, just let us tear it down. It's not going to cost much more to just start over than to do what you suggest.
Yeah.
So now we have nice high ceiling, 10.5, 11-foot ceilings on the first floor, which makes all the difference.
And I meant to ask you this. I assumed that this was, I'm just thinking pandemic wise, this was completed well before we all had to kind of, go inside, and I can just imagine these porches were sort of a godsend to these homeowners. Okay, so let's move on. We've talked about sort of looking to historic houses. What about when we go in behind, you all have gone in, legendary architects, you go into a project that was originally designed by someone who sort of defined a generation or helped shape the architecture of an era. And, you've updated the homes by the likes of Franklin Abbott and other designers. And so, this project, in the case of this Southern California home, I'm showing the original front elevation of it. And this is, this was designed by a very prominent voice of 1950s and 1960s Hollywood. And this is his original front elevation drafted for the actress Eleanor Parker, who starred in films with Ronald Reagan and Humphrey Bogart. And so here you have this original elevation, and I'm showing you, and Roger, this was the project that you led, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
And as I show you these, this is the house in its scale and in its just sort of moment in time. I feel like everybody here would have lived in, had our dreams of becoming a Hollywood starlet, materialized. This is where we would have, to heck with all the big, rambling mansions and all of that. This is what it speaks such to its era. And obviously showing some afters here, and I'll go into more of them. But Roger, when you first visited this one, your first site visit, what did you see for the first time? What did you think you would change?
Actually, I didn't think I would change a thing.
Yeah.
I had spent a day. Our clients are from the East Coast, and they're old clients. We've done a number of projects for them, and they have business out west, and essentially needed a pied-à-terre because they'd gotten sick of staying in hotel rooms. So they were looking for a livably more modest scaled house, and their real estate agent spent a day ferrying me around all of Western LA, West LA, from Truesdale to Malibu, showing me I don't know how many houses. And the last one we saw was this one. And when I walked in the front door, I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect house. I mean, I would not change a thing because it had barely been altered since 1960 when he built it, when John Elgin Wolfe built it. In addition to that, I mean, the pedigree, Eleanor Parker, I mean, what more can you say?
Right.
And
right.
for my generation, by the way, she was the Baroness Schrader in The Sound of Music. So that's what I know her as. But it just had it had more than great bones. I mean, it had wonderful proportions, a really good plan, a sort of butterfly plan, which is organized entirely around this oval pool with a view of the skyline beyond, as you can see. And the rooms were just lovely and beautifully proportioned.
Yeah. And so, before I get to these plans, I did want to ask you, when you do have to make changes, because you've said to me that, a lot of the main rooms, right, they stand the test of time. It's more the smaller, like service kind of rooms that might have been upgraded over the years.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real issue. Obviously, it's a real issue when you are renovating a 19th century house or an early 20th century house, when the plumbing and kitchens were way more primitive. But even in the 50s and 60s, what was designed then doesn't really serve now, not only in the way they're laid out, but in the way they relate to the rest of the house, particularly kitchens. In addition to that, over the years in a house like this, interim renovations are usually made to those kinds of rooms, the bathrooms and the kitchens, which usually fall short of the quality of the original architecture and seem very dated today.
Yeah. And so, and I mentioned that also because if we're talking about, you have this project with an architect that had a real voice, a real vision, you're trying to preserve a lot of that, but there are changes that you have to make. And
Yes.
So often you'll go and you'll look for the original plans, and we have one here. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Well, we actually were able to access the John Wolfe archives. Who knew they existed, but they do, at UC Santa Barbara. And they included a good number of the original drawings of this house, including this sketch that he had done, which he had done for the living room, with rubble stone walls, a cute little French fireplace and cabinets at one end of the room. Also an exposed beam ceiling. And drawings like this gave us insight, more insight to his original, what might have been his original intentions, although who knows how much of this might have been inspired by Mrs. Parker, asking for certain details in this house, opposed to what John Wolfe might have wanted to do, like that little French fireplace. But we were able to take certain aspects of that and reincorporate it into the house as we renovated it. For example, in the living room, which you see here, there was no fireplace when we got there. But we poked around on the wall and found the original firebox, which we expanded, gave a more contemporary mantle, a cantilevered hearth to. And we also exposed the beams in the ceiling, which gave us a foot more of ceiling height and also a slightly more rustic feel to the space, which helped dress it down from its formality. We also, by the way, did strip the plaster off the walls and found that stone wall, which had been put in And as soon as we uncovered it, we covered it up again because it was really
This
pretty,
one,
pretty ugly.
yeah, okay. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I'm showing a few more pictures of it. And I feel like, is there anything that you advice that you would give for something to keep in mind when working on a historically significant property, to hit that balance of client livability, with authenticity? Because livability is obviously your task. Like, that is what you have to work with.
Right. Well, I think it's critical that you sort of take from the original architect, assume the original architecture has an integrity of its own. It's important to understand what makes it that way, and then extend that over whatever your renovations are. So in the case of John Wolfe, it's proportion. His room is very simple. There are no moldings to speak of, but they're exquisitely proportioned. And we tried to incorporate that sense within the kitchen, which we redid, and the bathroom and the dressing room, and even in the living room as we reconfigured it. The important thing is that for the house to function, those spaces have to function well. If they don't, you're living in a museum.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point. Randy, is there anything that you would add to that?
I would add that John Wolfe was such a well-known architect that his houses are almost like celebrities in California. And if any of you remember the movie The Kid Stays in the Picture about the movie producer Robert Evans, the movie starts with a tracking shot going through the front door and through the living room of that John Wolfe house.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you mentioned this is probably, super, I don't know. We're all like looking for series to watch these days. And I don't know if anybody's seen the show Bosch, and he lives in that sort of like glass cube over like the Hollywood Hills. And
yes,
I've had conversations where I'm like, I feel like the house is a character, because you're always, every time he's there, it's
absolutely.
The set decorating is beautiful as well. He's playing his record player and all of this, but I feel like it's funny that you mentioned that the house is a character and is a character in the show.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's see, where are we going next? I think we're going to, let me get through these photos. Okay, so next we're going to historic neighborhoods and the challenges that those pose and sort of best practices here, because that's another sort of, I'm sure from what I've heard, in some ways it's kind of a minefield, and it depends on where it is. And but Randy, what I'm showing now is an historic picture of this Wyckoff Manor house located on a prominent corner in Southampton. This was torn down in the 40s or 50s. Let me show the actual house. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and if ever there was a house that's a tear down, it would have been this one. But the Hamptons became a resort after the Civil War, so there's 150 years of history, and the house that we're about to see in a minute was about the third house on this piece of property. The house that you have on the screen now was built around 1918, but it replaced an earlier house from the late 19th century. And this house was on like a 20-acre property. And it was built, as you see in this postcard, by Dr. Wyckoff. But then in the late 20s, it was bought by Jessie Woolworth, one of the Woolworth heiresses, and her husband, Jim Donnelly. And they named the manor Walden Manor. But they only spent a couple years there because they didn't make the scene socially. One of Jessie's faux pas was said to be that she wore diamonds during the day. So Jessie found that Palm Beach was much more to her liking, and she was much more better received there. So that's
where was she better received?
Palm Beach.
Oh, in Palm Beach.
Yeah, so she built a huge house down there and spent most of her days, the rest of her life there. In this house, although she retained ownership for years, she didn't go there after her first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
So finally, in the 40s, it was sold, I think, after her death. And the new owner of the property tore this house down. So since the late 40s, this was just an immense lawn at this very prominent corner in Southampton. And then around 7 or 8 years ago, it was subdivided, and our client bought the lot that is more or less where the house you see in this photo where it was. And when, just a funny side story, as we were excavating the house, we kept finding old pipe, and we didn't know what it was for. But then when we found this photo, we realized it was the irrigation system for these very elaborate gardens.
Oh, wow. Yeah, those are the like parterre gardens that kind of stretch to the water almost. Maybe.
Yeah, which were all Jesse Woolworth's doing.
Oh, okay. Well, before we show the actual house, you know, and also how you approached kind of, I mean, you have architectural boards, you have all of those things in these historic, where they have codes and that kind of thing. But I want to show some of the houses that you looked to, or the buildings that you looked to for precedent. And this is from, let's see, I wrote it down. It's like 18, this is the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club by Stanford White in 1890s, correct? Also
yeah, well, yes, it started as a small building. This is kind of its most recent appearance after a number of additions. But you know, the houses that we do in the Hamptons are shingle style, but we try to look for very local precedents and inspiration to kind of really tie them to where they are. And this house that you're showing now is actually around the corner from our project. It's from the early 20th century, and it was an architect's house, a very well-known New York architect, Robert H. Robertson. And it was one of the favorites of our client. And in fact, they almost bought this house, and then the property they bought became available. So as you'll see in a few moments, these 3 arches I carried into our project to remind our client of the house she liked so much around the corner.
Yeah, and we'll see that in a moment too. I'll take a quick pause here to kind of show this, this is the house that you built. And there's a wonderful photo right here. Those are the arches that you were.
Yeah, those are the arches, and that's the primary bedroom of the house.
Okay.
And it has 2 small porches that frame those windows.
So, okay, so you need to develop a plan for a house that I would imagine would be getting a lot of, or a project that would be getting a lot of attention. It's, you know, you'll be building from scratch, right? And you're going to the architectural board, that kind of thing. How do you approach something like that? I mean, we talked about the historic precedent and like looking for, are you showing them these photos as well? Like, are you showing some things that are local that they would recognize? What are the best ways to kind of approach something like this? It's so high profile, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, you know, and at the moment that we were seeking our approval, Southampton had put a moratorium on any new waterfront houses. So we had to get an exception to the moratorium. So what we often do is build a model, you know, to present both to our client and to the locality where we are. And our model was quite convincing, because at that hearing, there were 2 other houses also seeking exceptions, more modern in style, and both of them were rejected, and ours was approved in like 5 minutes.
Amazing. And I think,
yeah,
you know,
it was amazing.
And another thing I noticed too, and I think we talked about before, was there's sort of there's a sense of belonging that you're creating that obviously comes from the local vernacular, but it kind of goes beyond the structural and into the landscape design that's sort of that is a key component also of a sense of belonging. And
Yeah.
what do you keep in mind when you try to do that, when you're thinking
Yeah, well, this slide you have on the screen is one of my favorites because it kind of encompasses the whole kind of magic of this house and the site. What you see, that house in the distance, was actually the pool house for the estate. And it was built by Jessie Woolworth because she wasn't allowed to join the beach club, which is right next door. So she built this actually beautiful pool house, beach house. And this huge lawn that our house looks out at from this porch. Our client was born in South Carolina, so porches were quite important to her. And so we located this porch really on the most prominent corner of the house with the best views across this endless piece of lawn.
it's absolutely magical. There should be some sort of diaries from an architect where you have all of these stories, backstories from the people that lived there before. Let me know if you ever want to write that. I'm in. So here's some interior photos of it, and then we have this wonderful overhead that kind of gets us back to.
That really tells the whole story from the aerial we started with, looking in the other direction, to this that shows this really fantastic setting, both by Lake Agawam and near the ocean.
Yeah, it's just absolutely remarkable. It's taken us all away today, I think. We have one final house, and I think it's a great place to end on, because we've talked about the architecture of the past guiding us, but then you have the blank slates, where you as an architect sort of need to build a backstory in order to kind of get the momentum of the project and the story of the project going. And what I'm showing you now is the front of the sort of the approach of this project. This is Roger's project in the Northeast, correct?
Yes, it is.
And it's, I believe, 20 acres.
It's a 25-acre site, and it actually has another site next to it. It's another 20 acres or so.
Okay, so you had as much land as you wanted to build on, and right next to it is I'm showing something that we'll talk about in a moment, which was kind of an inspiration building that Roger used. But can you just orient us to sort of, you have this expansive site. What are some of the directives that you had from the homeowner in terms of the program and what they wanted to do here?
Well, it was, excuse me, it was a blank slate, and it was a blank slate piece of property that had never been built on. So it was 25 acres or so of wooded, heavily wooded, sort of level land, overlooking a pond with distant views of the ocean. And we had a lot of environmental constraints, which are actually conflicting. One agency would restrict the amount of clearing we could do on the property, and another agency encouraged us to clear because there was an endangered moth, believe it or not, that had made it its habitat. So we cozied up to that second agency and were able to do enough clearing to essentially establish what we and our clients envisioned as a New England farmstead, with a lawn that sort of rolled down towards the pond, with those distant views of the ocean. They wanted, also we were restricted in height to about 27 feet, which led us to design essentially a one-story house. So most of the programs, about 10,000 square feet, is on one floor, including the primary suite. This is a one guest suite on a second floor. The client wanted something that blended in with the local architecture, with the vernacular of the local farms and even shingle style houses. At the same time, he wanted a barn burner, what we call a barn burner, a destination for him, his friends, and his family. So we needed to incorporate both of those desires without having them conflict with each other.
And this is, and I'm going to show you all this. It's such a wow moment, for this house. And what we're showing, this is E.S. Pryor's, it's a barn in Exmouth.
Yes, yes. It's
And
an English house from the late 19th century.
And
And
that's
this,
on the right.
you're on the right, and that has a kind of plan that was developed by a number of English architects and Americans, late 19th, early 20th century, called a butterfly plan, which I alluded to before with one of the previous houses, where wings flare out from each other. And what they do is they actually break down the scale of the house so that when you're in one part of it, you don't really get a sense for the overall size of the house. In addition, the angled wings create views from different parts of the house towards different points outside. So we adapted that to our plan. And actually the original scheme for the house was a full circle, which incorporated a gallery, some additional guest rooms, and an indoor swimming pool, which you see on the left in our model. But we like the idea of the butterfly plan, and we essentially smoothed out the angles by making them curves. One, because we like curves, they're smoother, they're more elegant, and a bit more contemporary also in feel, which appealed to our clients. And it did, as you said, gave it the house this wow factor. We couldn't give it in terms of in terms of height, so we gave the wow factor in the plan.
It's really going back to that model. I mean, to be kind of just basic and crude about it, it's party in the back. Like you said, like there is, you said like a barn bird that really resonated, because I'm like, yeah, this was a family compound kind of thing. So you have, and that's why I showed this approach when you don't know, as you're approaching that. But now I just want to give everybody kind of a sense of how this plays out in the interiors. This is the rear. Correct? This is,
well, I'll call it one of the rears. That's the family end of the house. The breakfast room in the middle, guest end at the left, and the dining room and its porch on the right.
Okay. Yeah, and all of these outdoor living areas. But look at this in the interior, how that sort of plays out. My favorite, I would say, would be this one. You can kind of see, sort of how it goes around a bit. Yeah. Right.
The curve expresses itself inside the house episodically. Not every room has a curved wall, but here in the kitchen and family room, we actually leveraged it to the advantage of the plan, with curves on both sides of the rooms.
Yeah. Now, I think, one thing that would be wonderful is, what are some of this question is for both of you. Roger, we'll start with you. Is, are there any pitfalls that as an architect you can run into with a blank slate? What is your advice for dealing with a blank slate and how that can go wrong? It might seem easy, but it's maybe.
I think one thing to do is to remember that you're at all times that you're working for somebody else, not for yourself. It's you do need to come up with a backstory, I think, to lend sense to the architecture that you're creating. And we're artists, so our ego is wrapped up in whatever we do. But at the end of the day, we're also service providers, and we're designing places for people to live in, and what their needs are and what their dreams are should factor large in how we design what we are providing them with.
Randy?
Well, it's a blank slate for a site, but in the end, everything's been done before. So it's kind of finding a new take on it, and tying it to the beautiful landscapes that we're usually given to create our houses.
Yeah. Well, it's this one. I mean, and I always love. We talk about almost any sort of interior design story it's not interior, I would say decorative art story that we do. You know, if we're talking about a pattern, or if we're talking about a certain form of pottery, we're going back, you know, we're talking about where it came from, because I feel like, you know, there's that quote about, like, you know, you want to make people care, tell them your story, you know. And so you tell all of these, again, like Diary of an Architect kind of thing, you know, of the people that lived there before, all of these things that come in together, that sort of make a story, make a character out of a house, or you know, a form of decorative arts. So I find that fascinating, just that idea of building a backstory.
I think in all of our houses, there's a sense, whether it's Randy's or mine, or Grant Morani's or Gary Brewer's, there's a sense of familiarity to the architecture that is, I mean, the last thing we want to do is challenge our clients. And we want them to enjoy the spaces they're in and feel connected to them, and feel that they're connected to traditions.
Yeah, yeah.
That being said, this house in particular, I think, is a very bold move, you know, in terms of its shape and geometries that, you know, not every client would be up for. And I think Roger was lucky to have an adventuresome client who was really amenable to an adventuresome geometry in house.
I have to say that when we first presented this scheme, which was we call it the donut, the full round version. We had a model and a rendering, and you know, the whole 9 yards of a presentation. And the meeting with the clients lasted. This is in person, of course. I would say it lasted about half an hour. They walked in, they saw it, they said, "Okay, let's do it," and no questions asked. That was a great moment. That is a great moment.
That is a great moment. Well, let's end on that note, because I'm told that we have some questions lined up. We've got people who want to talk to you. So I think we're going to switch over to question modes where let's see. All right. I've got them here. And I think we're also going to go out of share screen. Okay, so I have, let's see, thinking about the Wolf, California house that you loved right on site. Do you ever have clients that want to buy a house that you hate or think that you can't do anything with? That's an excellent question.
Yes. And some of those, we've actually convinced some of those clients to tear the house down. And some of those clients we've respectfully declined the offer to work with.
Okay.
And I don't think we've actually worked on a house that we have, quote unquote, hated.
Well,
I speak for myself.
I was asked some years ago to renovate this house that I, in fact, did. And it was too recently to tear down, and especially the vineyard would have been a real transgression, I think, of local kind of standards to tear down such a new house. So I renovated it and did about 5 additions and renovations over a 5 to 7 year period. And I never liked the house any better. And thank God our sold the house and moved on. So I didn't have to work on it anymore.
You know, one thing that I've learned, at least in what we call gut renovations, which is not what that John Wolfe house was, but when you go to a house and you basically sort of tear it completely apart and start from scratch, you're not saving money over new construction necessarily.
Yeah.
So if it's a bad house,
yeah,
and you're able to build the same size house, if that's what you want, you know, without any zoning constraints, consider building anew.
Yeah. I've got lots of questions here. These are great questions. So I was just trying to figure out. Let's go back to the beginning. You mentioned the return of the lake house, and it's so interesting to think of that in terms of global warming and COVID. Are most people still wanting big sprawling lake houses, or are any of your clients interested in smaller footprints?
Well, the lake house.
Randy, I think your internet is cutting a bit. We can always come back.
Well, I was saying, just recently I've been asked about doing a lake house on one of the Finger Lakes, and our client started the conversation by saying they wanted a house. So, I think it's transferring that sensibility to different location.
Uh-huh. Okay, let me see how many. It looks, yeah, Randy's, you're going in and out a little bit. So we'll, Roger, do you have any personal favorite historic architects?
I really like Edwin Lutyens. We all like Edwin Lutyens. Like, you may not see it in my work, but I love Palladio, work of Palladio. I actually like modernist architects like Corbusier. I mean, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. Whoever
and we don't, we don't work in any one style necessarily.
Right.
I mean, we work in styles that are appropriate to where we're building, including modern.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought this is a challenge question, which I think is just lovely. The body of work this is a question that came in from the audience. The body of work we've seen is incredible and inspiring. If you had to build on a budget, what would be the feature to splurge on? I'm trying to think for me too. I'm trying to
Great windows.
Great windows. Why?
Yes, well built, and well detailed, and large windows. One, because they will last forever, and if they're I was going to use an expletive, but if you use lousy windows or cheap windows, they're one of the first things to go. It's a great investment. They bring the outdoors in, and they can really enhance the proportions of the space.
That's very interesting because, I think it's not something that's talked about that much. And we tend to, in our house stories, that kind of thing, it's not talked about that much. So I actually learn a lot from just that, that's actually, oh, Randy's back, I think. Can you see us? Can you hear us?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but I think the cameras, we can hear you sort of in spots, but it's fine. We've done a great job through the whole thing by all of us holding our internet, which is a challenge sometimes for sure. Randy, do you same question to you. If you had to build on a budget, what would be the one feature to splurge on?
I agree with Roger, the windows. And, we recently were working on a house still under construction and asked our clients to spend, like $1 jillion on a window package, which they went along with us on windows, where they said, oh my God, I understand why you wanted us to do this. These are just, the French doors and windows are just amazing and make the house.
That's wonderful. I think we can all learn a lot from that. I am told we are out of time. I want to remind our audience about your book, Houses, on sale now. Please go out and get that. You will find countless inspiration. You'll find all of these questions answered, I think. Oh, wait, I see. Attendees of today's event can get 20% off a new copy of Houses, Robert A. Stern Architects, by using the code SPRING21 when they purchase it on Biden's website. So go get that. Make sure you go get that. That's Biden.com. And I also want to thank Logan Gardens for sponsoring this wonderful discussion today. Great, and we had so many reminders to get outdoors. That sort of porch story house that we all loved so much. The great tie-in with Logan Gardens as well. And I just want to thank you both for being here and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you. This was fun.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, it was great.
Great. Well, congratulations on the book, and have a wonderful rest of spring. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining.